Walter Hobbs had stood at the doors of the Aldermere for 27 years, and in that time he had learned to read the whole evening from the first 10 minutes of it. He could tell, from the way a man handed over his coat, whether he would tip the cloakroom girl or walk past her as if she were furniture. He could tell, from the hush that moved through a ballroom, exactly who had just walked in. That hush came at 8 o'clock sharp, the way it always did at Mr. Damon Sterling crossed the lobby in a charcoal suit, cut so cleanly it seemed to absorb the chandelier light rather than reflect it, and the room rearranged itself around him without a word being said. Conversations did not stop. They simply lowered, the way a tide pulls back before it comes in again. Sterling Maritime owned half the docks on the eastern coast, and most of the men who worked them, and the man at the center of it had a reputation that walked into a room a full step ahead of him. Cold, exacting, a man who had not smiled in public in 2 years. Walter knew the real reason for the 2 years, even if most of the gala's guests did not. He had been on the door the night Mrs. Celia Sterling's car came back from the hospital without her in it. He had watched Mr. Sterling carry his small daughter up the front steps himself, refusing every offered arm, and he had not seen the man's face do anything but hold perfectly still since. The gala itself was held every year in Celia's name, the Sterling Children's Fund, for hospital wards and shelters up and down the coast, and Mr. Sterling attended exactly one event each year, this one, because his wife had asked him to. Once, before she went, he stood near the head table for 2 hours, spoke to no one longer than was required, and left precisely at 10. Walter had watched this same evening unfold 7 times now. He had no reason to think the 8th would be any different. Down in the cloakroom, the night looked entirely different. Mara Quinn had taken the extra shift because the agency paid double for galas, and double was the difference, this month, between the rent and not the rent. Her usual evening sitter had a fever, and there had been no one else, so she had brought Sam, 8 years old, quiet, a reader, and tucked him into the corner of the cloakroom with a library book and a promise that he would be invisible if he tried. He had nodded solemnly, the way he did most things since his father's boat accident 18 months before, and had not said a word since. The coat rush, when it came all at once. 300 guests arriving inside 20 minutes, a river of furs and overcoats pouring across the counter. Mara worked the hangers 2 at a time, calling numbers, and somewhere in the crush, a tall man in a charcoal coat handed his overcoat across without quite looking at her, the way most of them did, and was swallowed back into the crowd before she had even found a hanger. It was Sam who found the wallet. He had slid off his stool to retrieve a pencil that had rolled under the long bench, and his hand came back not with the pencil, but with a slim black billfold, heavier than it looked, that must have slipped from an inside coat pocket in the crush and been kicked clear across the floor. He sat with it a moment, turning it over, and then, because he was 8 and curious, and had never seen that much money in his life, he opened it. He brought it to his mother without a word, the way he brought her everything now, and held it open so she could see. A thick fold of bills, more than Mara made in 2 months of agency shifts. A set of cards, one of them embossed with a name she recognized from the gala program stacked by the door, D. Sterling, and tucked behind the cards in its own worn sleeve, a small photograph, its corners gone soft and pale with handling, of a young woman laughing with a baby on her hip. One of the other cloakroom girls, passing with an armful of coats, glanced over and gave a low whistle. "That's Sterling's," she said. "Lord, you could lose that for a week and nobody'd ever know. Man's got more money than the bank has." Mara did not answer right away. She was looking at her son's face, at the careful, hopeful way he was watching her, the way he had watched her ever since his father died, as if checking that the world still worked, the way his father had told him it did. A found thing belongs to the man who lost it, not the man who finds it. Her husband used to say, every time Sam brought home a stray coin or a dropped glove, and he had said it so often that it had become a kind of family law, the last law their household still ran on. She folded the billfold closed exactly as she had found it. She had not even counted the bills, and crouched down to Sam's level. "We're going to give it back," she said, "ourselves, not the lost and found box." "Him." Sam nodded, solemn, and took her hand. Walter saw them come up from the service stair. A cloakroom attendant in her plain black dress, a small boy in a hand-me-down jacket, neither of them on the approved list for the ballroom floor, and his first instinct, 27 years deep, was to turn them gently back before security did it less gently. But the boy was holding something out in front of him with both hands. The way a child carries something he has been told is important. And the woman's face had a steadiness in it that Walter had learned, over a long career, not to argue with. So instead of turning them away, Walter walked with them. He led them along the edge of the floor, past the string quartet, to where Mr. Sterling stood near the head table with his solicitor, half listening to a councilwoman's speech about the year's fundraising total. Walter cleared his throat, the small sound he was capable of making, and said, "Mr. Sterling, forgive the interruption. This young man believes he's found something of yours." Sterling turned. For a moment his eyes passed over the boy, then the woman, with the polite, unseeing courtesy he extended to everyone at these events. And then Sam held up the billfold, and Sterling's hand went, automatically, to the inside pocket of his jacket and found it empty. "That's mine," he said quietly. He took it the way a man takes something he has just realized was precious only in the instant of nearly losing it. He opened it without thinking. A reflex, checking. And the cards were there, and the bills were there. Every one of them, folded exactly as he kept them. And then his thumb found the worn sleeve at the back, and he went very still. The photograph was there, untouched. Even the soft, pale crease at the corner. The one he had made himself 2 years ago, the last week Celia was well enough to laugh like that, was exactly where it had always been. It was the only photograph he had of her holding their daughter as a baby. The originals, the framed ones, the albums, all of it had gone into storage after the funeral, because he had not been able to look at any of it. This one he had kept, against his own better judgment, folded into his wallet where he would not have to choose to look at it, only stumble across it, alone, late at night, the way grief is supposed to find a man. He had not realized, until this exact moment holding it, how much he had been quietly dreading the day he reached for it and it was gone. "You opened it," he said to the boy. It was not an accusation. It came out almost like a question. Sam nodded. "I wanted to see whose it was, so we could give it back, and you didn't." Sterling stopped. He looked at the fold of bills, untouched, and then at the woman's plain black dress, the careful mend at one cuff, the way she held her son's shoulder rather than her own hands. He understood all at once exactly what that money would have meant to a woman dressed like that, and exactly what it had cost her not to take it. "We don't keep what isn't ours," Mara said simply. "My husband used to say that. I'm trying to make sure Sam grows up the same way." Something in Damon Sterling's face, something that had been held perfectly still for 2 years, through funerals and board meetings and 1,000 evenings exactly like this one, came apart very quietly, in front of 300 people. He did not make a sound. He simply stood there with his late wife's photograph in his hand, and his eyes filling, and did not look away from it, and did not seem to care for the first time in 2 years who saw. Walter, who had watched this man for 7 straight galas without once seeing his composure slip, found that his own throat had gone tight. It was the solicitor, gently, who noticed the second thing, a single folded slip of paper that had been tucked behind the photograph, gone soft with age, the kind of thing a man forgets is even there. He took it only because Sterling's hand was shaking too badly to manage it himself, and unfolded it, and went very quiet. It was a page from an old ledger, Threeland's figures in a clerk's careful hand, dated nearly a year back, that the solicitor had been quietly hunting for 6 months. It was the missing piece of an audit into the fund's accounts that had never quite balanced, a discrepancy that kept circling back, always just out of reach, to the desk of the fund's longtime financial director, a courteous, silver-haired man named Mr. Edmund Price, who had managed Celia's charity for 15 years, and whom no one had ever thought to question. Sterling must have tucked the page into his wallet himself, the solicitor realized, the night he'd first found it. And then, in the long grief-fogged weeks after, simply forgotten it was there. It had been sitting against his late wife's photograph for almost a year, waiting. Nothing was said about it that night, in front of guests. That was not how Sterling did things, and it was not how the matter was handled. But within the week, quietly, through lawyers and an internal review, Mr. Price stepped down from the fund's board, for personal reasons, and the fund's accounts, audited properly for the first time in a decade, balanced to the penny by spring. No headlines, no scandal, just a name quietly removed from a letterhead, and a great deal of money that had been meant for children's wards finding its way, finally, back to children's wards. Sterling asked Mara only one more thing that night before she and Sam were walked, by Walter himself, this time, with considerably more ceremony than they had arrived with, back down to the cloakroom. "Will you be here next year?" he asked. "For the gala?" Mara, startled, said she supposed she would if the agency called. "Don't wait for the agency," Sterling said. It was 6 weeks before Walter saw Mr. Sterling again, and when he did, it was not at the Aldermere at all. The hotel had been asked to cater a small spring gathering at the Sterling house, modest by that family's standards, no more than 30 guests on the South Lawn, to mark the official reopening of the Children's Fund under its new director. Walter recognized her at once, though she was dressed differently now, and stood differently, the way people do when they have stopped expecting to be turned away. Mara Quinn had spent the last month learning the fund's accounts from the ground up at Sterling's insistence. Before he would let her sign anything, he had told her, plainly, that he wanted the fund run by someone who understood exactly where every dollar of it went, and that he had met exactly one person all year who he trusted to care that much. Sam was there too, sitting cross-legged on the lawn beside a small girl in a yellow dress. Sterling's daughter, Vivienne, 7 years old and, Walter had heard, painfully shy since her mother's death, slow to warm to anyone. The two of them had their heads bent together over something, a book or a beetle, or some small treasure only children find. And every so often a thin, surprised laugh carried across the grass, high and bright, and Walter watched Mr. Sterling's head turn toward the sound every single time, as if he could not quite get used to it yet, and did not want to. Late in the afternoon, Walter carried a tray past the terrace and saw Sterling and Mara standing a little apart from the others, not saying very much, watching the children. Sterling said something. Walter didn't catch what, and Mara laughed, an easy, unguarded sound, and for just a moment, Sterling's whole face changed with it, the way a room changes when a light is switched on in the next one over. It was the first time in 2 years that Walter had seen the man smile without seeming, somewhere underneath it, to be holding something back. He did not look like the most feared man on the eastern docks just then. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and had just, without quite meaning to, set it down, and found, to his surprise, that someone was still there to help him carry whatever came next. Walter went back inside for more glasses, and did not say anything to anyone, because there are some things a man simply puts away to remember later, the way Mr. Sterling had kept that photograph all along, folded close, waiting for someone honest enough to hand it back.